I was left in the woods during a violent snowstorm, no blanket, no goodbye. My adoptive parents left a forged letter saying I'd run away. They thought the snow would kill me, but the person who pulled me from death was the woman they told me had died 16 years ago, my biological mother. She had survived hidden and waited silently for the day she'd find me, in the heart of a frozen hell. If you think this is just another family story, you're dead wrong. Hit that subscribe button now so you won't miss the painful truths and haunting stories we bring to light. Before everything collapsed, I used to believe that family, no matter how cold, was still the safest place on earth. They always kept the thermostat just a few degrees below comfortable, not freezing, not unbearable, just enough for the cold to settle into your bones if you sat still too long. And that's what Ivy Carter had learned to do: sit still, quiet, unseen, a shadow in the house that was supposed to be her home. The old colonial-style house sat at the edge of a gray neighborhood that matched its personality. Stiff fences, trimmed hedges, neighbors who nodded but never smiled. It looked like stability, safety. But behind the clean windows and tastefully bland curtains, the Carter home was a vacuum. Every room muted, every word weighed. At 16, Ivy had become an expert in avoidance. She moved like a ghost early mornings, late nights. Schedules constructed so precisely she rarely crossed paths with them. Paul and Meredith Carter, her parents. Or at least that's what the adoption papers said. But Ivy remembered things they didn't think she should. The sound of a different lullaby. A perfume that wasn't Meredith's. A woman's voice, warm and lilting, whispering, "My little firefly." That memory came like a flicker, always gone too fast. What stayed was the cold. And the pills. Every morning, Meredith placed them on the counter. Same time, same glass of filtered water. No explanations, no changes. Just small, chalky capsules she was told were for her chemical imbalance. A diagnosis Ivy had never heard a doctor say aloud. "You get foggy without them," Meredith would state flatly without looking up from her smoothie or her spreadsheet. But what are they? Ivy had asked once years ago. Paul had snapped the newspaper sharply and muttered, "Gratitude. That's what they are." She took them. Of course she did. What choice did she have? But at night she'd press her fingers into the inside of her cheek where the bitterness of the pill sometimes lingered and wonder, what if I stopped? Would I wake up different? Would I wake up at all? It wasn't just the pills. It was the way Meredith watched her, not with concern but with measurement. Like she was assessing product quality, checking for defects. Paul, meanwhile, treated her like a noise he couldn't quite turn off. Barely tolerable, occasionally useful. They didn't hit her. They didn't scream. There were no bruises to photograph. No calls to child services would have gone anywhere. Theirs was a cruelty that wore a mask of quiet perfection, the kind that left no marks except the ones that festered inside. But Ivy had always been observant. In a house where love was rationed and truths were diluted, she'd learned to write things down. Hidden between the pages of a battered biology textbook was a worn black notebook, her only act of rebellion. It wasn't filled with teenage poetry or daydreams about escape. It was data. She documented every symptom. Dizziness after pill number 2. Numbness in her left arm for exactly 7 minutes on a Tuesday. A metallic taste in her mouth that lingered long after dinner. Episodes of dissociation she couldn't explain, blank moments where the world dimmed and she felt like she was watching her life through glass. The doctors her parents took her to, always in distant clinics, never the same one twice, called it stress-related. Hormonal, psychosomatic. One even patted her hand and said, "Teenagers are dramatic by design, dear." Ivy smiled politely, then wrote. His hands shook when he filled out my chart in her notebook later that night. There was one entry that scared her more than all the rest. January 14th, woke up at 3:12 a.m., couldn't move, chest heavy, eyes open but everything blurry. Heard a voice, not Meredith, not Paul, a voice I know but don't remember, kept repeating, "They're watching." She'd underlined it 3 times. That morning, Meredith made her a smoothie and stood too long watching her drink it. That night, Ivy didn't sleep. At school, she was invisible, or maybe worse, a curiosity. Teachers praised her for being so polite, so composed, but none of them noticed the subtle pauses in her speech, the tiny tremors in her hands. No one asked why she never brought lunch, why she always sat near a window, why she flinched when someone said the word hospital. The guidance counselor called her in once. Ivy didn't know if someone had raised a flag or if it was just procedure. "Your grades are excellent," the woman had said, fake warmth radiating from her voice like a scented candle. "But you don't seem very connected." Ivy had smiled the way Meredith taught her, wide enough to disarm, small enough not to invite questions. "Everything's fine," she'd said. "I just like quiet." The counselor nodded, satisfied. Another box checked, another system satisfied. But Ivy knew something was wrong, deeply, deliberately wrong. It wasn't just the way her body betrayed her more each week. It wasn't just the ever-changing pills or the unnerving calm in her parents' voices. It was something else, a presence, a truth buried just beneath the surface clawing to be known. Once when Meredith forgot to lock the drawer, Ivy found a folder labeled Carter, Trial Group C. She opened it with shaking hands. Inside charts, timelines, a spreadsheet with a line that read, Subject number C3. Onset response stabilized at age 14, still viable. The date matched her birthday. There was no name, just initials. I see. She heard the garage door open. She snapped the folder shut and slid it back into place, heart pounding so loudly it drowned out reason. Later, she added a note in her black book. They have files. I'm not their daughter. I'm not even their project. I'm their experiment. That night, she dreamed of white rooms and long needles, of wires attached to her temples and voices behind mirrored glass. She woke up with a scream trapped in her throat, cold sweat soaking her sheets. When she stumbled into the kitchen the next morning, Paul glanced at her without interest. You look pale, he said, sipping coffee. Maybe we'll have to adjust your dosage again. That was the moment she knew. They weren't keeping her safe. They were keeping her contained. She began testing them. She hid her pills under her tongue and spit them into a napkin later. She started taking her own notes on how her body felt without them, clearer, more alert, less floaty, but also more pain. Headaches like drills behind her eyes, muscle spasms that left her curled up for hours. Still, it felt real. She preferred pain to numbness. She noticed other things too. Paul kept a locked briefcase he never brought to work. Meredith received unmarked packages she always opened in the basement. There was a back room in the house Ivy had never been allowed in. The door was always locked. One day, she left a tiny piece of thread wedged in the corner. The next day, it was gone. Someone had been in there, and someone knew she was watching. At dinner, Paul smiled more than usual. Meredith poured her water with unusual care. Neither of them asked about school, or her day, or the bruises on her ribs from another night of uncontrolled spasms. Instead, Paul looked at her over his wine glass and said, How would you feel about a weekend trip, fresh air? A little snow. Maybe it's time we did something. Bonding. She knew it wasn't a question. She smiled anyway. That sounds nice. She didn't write in her notebook that night. She just stared at it, heart pounding as if it might answer the question clawing at her chest. Will I come back from this? She didn't know. But the thread in the door was gone, and the folder had been moved. And the pills that used to taste bitter now had no taste at all. They'd changed something. She could feel it. The invitation came on a Wednesday afternoon. Meredith didn't look up from her laptop when she said it, just a clipped sentence between mouthfuls of her kale salad and the clack of her keyboard. We're going to the mountains this weekend. Fresh air, snow. Ivy froze with her spoon halfway to her mouth. Oatmeal congealed in the bowl in front of her. What she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Paul looked up from the newspaper, raising one eyebrow like the announcement was perfectly ordinary. Ski trip, just the three of us. Meredith's fingers didn't pause. We'll leave Friday, pack light. That was it. No discussion, no smiles, no wouldn't that be fun tone. Just instructions dropped like a paperweight into the middle of her day. Something felt wrong immediately. The Carters didn't do trips. They didn't take family vacations. They didn't like spontaneity. Their idea of quality time was eating silently in the same room while the television played a travel documentary they'd never visit. Ivy had lived with them for 12 years, and in all that time, the farthest they'd gone together was a half-day drive to a medical symposium that Paul insisted on attending. So why now? And why the mountains? That night, Ivy lay awake, eyes open in the dark, counting the seconds between the hum of the HVAC and the soft thud of footsteps upstairs. She hadn't written in her notebook since she found the folder marked Trial Group C. Not because she didn't want to, but because the act of writing felt watched. Still, she couldn't ignore the ache growing inside her chest, the itch in her bones. Her instincts screamed. They were planning something. By Friday morning, the sky had turned steel gray. Snow flirted with the edges of the windshield as they packed the SUV. Meredith, sleek and black, its windows tinted darker than necessary. Ivy stood beside the curb watching as Paul carefully loaded 2 matching suitcases into the trunk. She held her duffel bag, old frayed at the edges. Inside it were clothes, a flashlight, her notebook, and a small box of protein bars she'd hidden over the last month. She didn't know why, only that she didn't trust whatever was waiting. You don't need that, Meredith said, eyeing the bag in Ivy's hands. I'll keep it, Ivy replied. A tense pause, then a shrug. Meredith climbed into the passenger seat. The drive started in silence. Snow began falling in earnest, 20 minutes in soft and relentless dusting the trees and roadsides like ash. Ivy watched it blur against the glass, her breath fogging the window slightly. Paul drove with both hands on the wheel, knuckles tight. His jaw clenched like he was chewing on words he couldn't spit out. Meredith stared straight ahead, occasionally tapping something on her phone. There was a buzz of anticipation in the air, but not the good kind. Not excitement. No music played, no small talk. Just the hum of tires and the low roar of wind. 2 hours passed. Ivy's fingers tingled from the cold seeping into the car. She reached to adjust the vent, but Paul slapped her hand away. Not hard, just firm, decisive. Don't touch the heat, he said. She shrank back into her seat. The trees thickened. The road narrowed. They left the main highway, turning onto a side road that grew bumpier with each mile. GPS was gone now. Her phone showed 0 bars. Ivy glanced at the dashboard clock, 2:47 p.m. She cleared her throat. Where are we going? Neither of them answered. Is it a lodge or something? She tried again, forcing a casual tone. Still nothing. Paul's eyes remained locked on the road. Meredith opened her glove compartment, took out a tissue, and began cleaning her glasses. Something clicked in Ivy's head like the final piece of a puzzle she didn't want to finish. The heat, the silence, the bags they packed without asking what she needed, her pills missing from the medicine cabinet that morning, the way Meredith had hugged her goodbye at the house, stiff and brief like she was sealing a box. They weren't bringing her somewhere. They were taking her away. Ivy pressed her fingers into the door handle, heart pounding. Bathroom, she blurted. I need to use the bathroom. Paul said nothing. Meredith didn't move. I said, I heard you, Paul cut in. We'll stop soon. But they didn't. Instead, the car veered off onto an unpaved trail Ivy hadn't even noticed, almost hidden behind a cluster of fir trees. Snow crunched under the tires as they pushed deeper into the forest branches, scraping the sides of the SUV like fingernails across glass. And then they stopped. Paul killed the engine. Silence. The kind that swallowed even the wind. Meredith stepped out first. Her boots crunched against the snow. She walked around to the back, opened the trunk, and pulled out Ivy's duffel bag. She let it fall onto the icy ground. Paul opened his door. Ivy didn't move. Ivy, he said, out. Her fingers tightened around the seatbelt, refusing. Paul leaned in, grabbed at the latch, and released it with a snap. Then he grabbed her wrist. Don't make this harder. Her legs didn't respond at first. Her lungs didn't seem to work. But something primal and terrified pushed her forward. She stumbled out into the cold. Meredith was holding an envelope. She handed it to Ivy without a word. Ivy stared at her. What is this? No answer. Where are we? What are you? Paul turned back toward the driver's seat. No, Ivy shouted, stepping forward, but he held up a hand. You've made your choice, he said. Don't come looking for sympathy now. I didn't. What choice? Meredith's eyes narrowed, cold and detached. You ran away, Ivy. That's what the note says. You left. You couldn't handle it anymore. What are you talking about? Paul was already climbing into the driver's seat. I didn't do anything, Ivy screamed. But the door slammed shut. The engine turned over. And just like that, they drove away. No second glance. No hesitation. Their taillights disappeared into the blur of snow and trees swallowed by the storm. Ivy stood frozen, envelope in hand, breath coming in broken gasps. Her fingers trembled as she opened the note. The handwriting was perfect. Meredith's. To whom it may concern, it read, Ivy has been struggling for some time now. She said she couldn't take it anymore. We tried our best. We love her, but she's gone. We're contacting the authorities. We pray she's safe. Lies. Elegant, rehearsed, undeniable. They had planned everything. Ivy fell to her knees in the snow, the cold biting through her jeans, her breath a mist of fear and disbelief. They had erased her. They had buried her with bureaucracy and quiet cruelty. And now she was alone. Really, truly alone. She looked around. Endless white. No sound but the wind whispering through the trees. The envelope slipped from her hands. She wanted to scream, to run, to be someone who could just collapse. But something inside her held firm, the last flicker of a flame that refused to die. They hadn't broken her. Not yet. And she would not let them write her ending. Not out here. Not like this. She picked up her bag and began to walk. Snow is quiet when it kills you. It doesn't scream. It doesn't roar. It just falls soft and slow until you forget what warmth ever felt like. Until even your heartbeat feels muffled. Ivy stumbled through the trees, each step sinking ankle deep into the white silence. Her duffel bag dragged behind her, its weight unnatural now, like she was hauling a corpse. Her body was numb. Her fingers no longer worked. Her breath came in shallow gasps, the cold biting through the last remnants of adrenaline. The storm had fully bloomed. It howled through the pines, twisting branches, lashing against her face like 1,000 frozen needles. The snow was blinding, thick, wild. It erased the world around her, swallowed the trail her feet had made, buried the evidence of her existence. She was disappearing, and part of her wanted to let it happen. They left me. They planned it. They'll tell the world I ran away, and no one will question it. The weight of that truth was heavier than the snow. Her knees buckled. She fell hard face first into a drift. Cold stabbed her cheeks. Snow filled her mouth. Her vision blurred no longer from the storm, but from the soft, terrifying veil of unconsciousness creeping in. She wanted to get up. Her brain screamed at her body, but nothing moved. The cold was a thief, and it had reached her spine. She closed her eyes and let go. Darkness took her, but not for long. A voice, muffled, distant, female. Then arms real solid, grabbing under her shoulders. Ivy's eyes fluttered open, snowflakes melting on her lashes. All she could see was the outline of a face, a woman bundled in thick furs, her breath misting the air in sharp bursts. She was strong, moving fast, dragging Ivy's nearly lifeless body through the woods with desperate purpose. "I've got you," the woman said, voice hoarse from the wind. "I've got you now." Ivy tried to speak, but her lips wouldn't part. Her throat felt sealed shut. All she managed was a faint moan, more air than sound. "Don't talk," the woman said. "Save your strength." The world shifted again. A door creaked. Warmth hit her like a punch. The woman pulled her into a small, dark space, wood walls, dim lantern light. A stove glowed orange in the corner, radiating heat like a lighthouse. The scent of pine smoke and something sharp alcohol maybe filled the air. She was lowered onto something soft, a cot layered with thick blankets. The woman moved fast, efficient. She stripped Ivy's coat off first, then the soaked sweatshirt beneath, working with practiced urgency. Her hands weren't gentle, but they weren't cruel. They were the hands of someone who knew how close death was. Ivy drifted. Voices echoed. Memories blurred Paul's silence. Meredith's eyes. The crunch of tires leaving her behind. Then nothing, just warmth. And breathing. Not hers. The woman was still beside her. When Ivy came to, it was night. Real night. No storm, no snow. Just the creak of wood settling, the soft crackle of fire, and the steady tick of an old clock on the wall. Her body ached in waves, her throat was raw, her hands bandaged, her lips split, but she was alive. She blinked. The ceiling above her was wooden, rough-hewn beams exposed. Blankets covered her to the neck. Her clothes were gone, replaced by a flannel nightgown several sizes too large. Something shifted in the shadows. The woman stepped forward from the far corner of the cabin, her figure illuminated by firelight. She looked to be in her late 40s, maybe early 50s, but her eyes held decades more. A faded scar curved beneath her right cheekbone, half hidden under a tangle of dark wind-worn hair. Her hands were tucked into the sleeves of an oversized sweater, her posture cautious but alert. She said nothing. Neither did Ivy. For a long moment, they just stared at each other, the air between them thick with the weight of unspoken things. Finally, the woman broke the silence. "You were 2 hours from freezing to death when I found you," she said. Her voice was deeper than Ivy remembered from the edge of the storm, less urgent, more controlled, almost afraid. "I wrapped you in heat blankets, warmed your limbs slowly. Not too fast or your body would have gone into shock." Her eyes flicked toward Ivy's face. "You don't remember." Ivy swallowed. Her throat burned. Her voice came out cracked, barely. The woman nodded, stepping closer. She knelt beside the cot and placed a thermos on the floor. "I made tea," she said. "You won't be able to hold it yet, but I'll help." Ivy stared. She didn't move, didn't speak. The woman didn't push. She simply reached over, uncapped the thermos, and poured steaming liquid into a chipped mug. Then, cradling the mug in both hands, she gently lifted Ivy's head and held the cup to her lips. "Slow sips," she said. The tea tasted like honey and herbs, strange, earthy, but soothing. It burned her tongue, but the pain felt real, anchoring. Ivy drank. When the cup was empty, the woman placed it aside and sat back cross-legged on the floor, eyes never leaving her. "What's your name?" she asked softly. Ivy hesitated. "Ivy." "Ivy Carter." Her body tensed. "Yes." The woman's expression didn't change, but her breath caught almost imperceptibly. "I thought so," she said. A pause. Then softly, "You look like her." Ivy blinked. "Who?" The woman didn't answer. She stood instead and walked to the stove. Her hands shook slightly as she adjusted the flames. Outside, the storm had passed, but snow still fell in soft flakes. "You've been out for most of a day," the woman said without turning. "I wasn't sure you'd make it through the night." "Why did you help me?" Ivy asked. Her voice was steadier now, though her limbs still felt like stone. The woman turned back slowly. "Because someone had to." "That's not an answer." "No," the woman agreed. "It's not." Silence bloomed again. Ivy stared at her, really stared. The woman's eyes, dark, searching, watched her with something that made her stomach twist. Not pity, not curiosity. Recognition. And something else. Pain. She tried to sit up, managed a few inches before the fire in her spine stopped her. She winced, breathing hard. The woman stepped forward, reaching out to help. Ivy flinched. "I'm not going to hurt you," the woman said. "I've heard that before." The woman froze. Her hand hovered in the air for a moment, then dropped to her side. "I know what they did," she said quietly. Ivy narrowed her eyes. "Who?" "Your adoptive parents." Ivy's blood turned cold. "How do you know about them?" The woman exhaled, slow and careful. Then she did something Ivy didn't expect. She pulled a worn envelope from her sweater pocket and placed it gently on the edge of the cot. Ivy stared at it. Her name was written on the front in a hand she didn't recognize. She reached out. Her fingers were still stiff, but she managed to open it. Inside a photo, a woman holding a baby, smiling. The woman in the photo was younger, brighter, but her eyes were the same as the one in front of her now. The baby had a faint birthmark near the temple. So did Ivy. She felt the world tilt. "I don't understand," she whispered. The woman stepped closer. Her voice broke. "You're my daughter, Ivy." The photo slipped from Ivy's hand and fluttered to the floor, landing face up on the wood like a discarded truth. Her heartbeat slammed against her ribs, too loud for the quiet of the room. She couldn't look at the woman Mira, if that was really her name. Couldn't make sense of the words that still echoed through her ears like a hallucination. "You're my daughter." It didn't make sense. None of it made sense. I don't know you," Ivy said, voice brittle too high. "I've never seen you before." Mira stayed where she was. Her hands curled into loose fists at her sides like she didn't trust herself to reach out again. "I know," she said softly. "You wouldn't remember. You were taken from me when you were still an infant." Ivy flinched. "Taken?" Mira nodded. "I was 25. Your father and I were researchers, genetic biologists. We were working on a classified program. Government funded at first. It started with mapping regenerative markers in DNA, harmless, hopeful. But that wasn't enough for the people funding it. They wanted more." She walked slowly toward the fire, as if talking about it required something to hold on to. Her silhouette flickered in the flames as she spoke low and controlled, like reciting something she'd practiced 1,000 times. "They brought in a new division, private money, military contractors. They changed the scope. Instead of just studying human cells, they wanted to create them, replicate them, enhance them. Your father, his name was Elliot, he wanted to walk away." Ivy sat frozen, every part of her aching, not just from the cold now, but from the weight of the impossible. "They told us we couldn't," Mira said, "that the research belonged to them, that we belonged to them. Elliot stole documents, proof of what they were really doing. He was going to blow the whistle. He had an encrypted drive, a press contact, a plan." She stared into the fire like it held pieces of him. "They got to him before he could leave the country. Made it look like a lab accident. I was pregnant with you at the time." The air in the room thickened. Ivy's throat tightened. "I tried to run, but they followed me. They made a deal, said they'd let me live if I gave you up. Said you'd be placed with a family under surveillance, raised normally, but monitored for side effects. I didn't understand what they meant. I just wanted you to survive." Ivy's voice came out hoarse, wounded. "So you gave me to them?" Mira turned sharply. "No, I was drugged during labor. I never held you, never even saw you. When I woke up, you were gone." She walked to a drawer, pulled something from it, and returned to Ivy's side with careful steps. Her hands were trembling now. A sealed envelope, inside a folded page and a small plastic vial. Mira handed it to Ivy. "I waited 17 years to give this to you." Ivy opened the envelope with fingers that barely felt real. The page was a photocopy DNA comparison results. Mira's name, her own, a 99.999% match. Beneath that was a journal page. A short entry in ink that had bled slightly from age. "She kicked for the first time today, like she's dancing. Like she knows the world is waiting to hurt her and she's already fighting back. I call her Ivy, like the vine, because she'll survive anything." Tears stung Ivy's eyes before she could stop them. She gripped the vial in her hand. This can be forged." Mira nodded. "It can, which is why I have more." She crossed to the other side of the room, unlatched a locked wooden chest, and lifted the lid. Inside, Ivy could see file folders, notebooks, and a black leather-bound book with a cracked spine. Mira returned with one more thing, a photograph yellowed and creased. Ivy saw herself maybe 3 years old in a park she didn't remember. But what caught her breath wasn't the child. It was the woman kneeling beside her, laughing, holding her hand. The same scar on her cheek. "I've had eyes on the Carter family since the day they took you," Mira said quietly. "For a while I thought maybe they'd treat you well, that maybe my silence bought you peace." Her mouth tightened. "But when I saw your medical fund being drained for untraceable pharmaceuticals, I knew they'd turned you into a test subject." Ivy's mind reeled. "You were watching me." "Not all the time. I didn't dare get too close. They've always had people. Surveillance, patterns to track anomalies. But I never stopped looking, not until I found where they were taking you yesterday." Ivy shook her head. "No, this doesn't make sense. They're cold, yes, but they didn't hurt me like this." "You don't know what they gave you," Mira said, her voice trembling now. "You don't know what your symptoms mean." Ivy looked down at her hands. Her fingertips still had the faint bruising from spasms she couldn't control. Her mind went to the notebook hidden in her duffel, its pages full of strange symptoms, blackouts, pain with no diagnosis. "I thought I was sick," she whispered. "You are," Mira said gently, "but it was given to you." Silence stretched. Ivy closed her eyes and saw every lie unravel at once. The specialist that rotated like clockwork. The pills that changed color without explanation. The missing days. The metallic taste in her mouth. The way she always felt like her mind didn't quite belong to her body. She opened her eyes. "I need to see your journal," she said. Mira nodded once and brought it to her. They sat together on the floor, side by side, flipping pages. Entries about Elliot. Lab notes scribbled in the margins. Diagrams of neurological pathways. Notes on a serum phase 2 compound, subject viability unknown. A drawing of a DNA strand circled with the word regenerative marker anomaly, written beside it. Then Ivy's name, over and over, each entry more desperate than the last, until the final one. They found me again. I feel it in the silence. The trees aren't safe anymore. If she's reading this, know that I fought to find you. Know that you were never a mistake. Know that love isn't always enough, but I never stopped loving you. Ivy sat back, the journal closed on her lap. What do we do now, she asked. Mira looked at her daughter, her voice barely a whisper. Now, we start digging. The fire had died down to a low hum, its orange glow flickering weakly across the floorboards. Outside, the wind had stilled, but inside the cabin, the air was thick with something heavier than smoke truth. Ivy sat hunched on a thick wool blanket, legs tucked beneath her arms wrapped tightly around herself as though she were bracing for impact. Mira moved slowly, deliberately placing a kettle on the stove, filling the silence with small, quiet sounds. But even the clink of the mug, or the whisper of the wind beneath the door, couldn't distract from what Ivy had asked. Tell me, she'd said, from the beginning, I want all of it. And now Mira stood across from her, fingers wrapped around a chipped mug, looking like a woman carrying a bomb she was too tired to hide anymore. It started before you were born, she said, finally, her voice flat but not detached, just exhausted from years of repetition in her own head. Before the Carter family, before the pills and the lies and the files in drawers that weren't supposed to be opened. Ivy's eyes didn't move from her. Mira inhaled slowly. Your father and I, we weren't just scientists. We were idealists, naive. He believed gene therapy could be used to repair damaged trauma, birth defects, inherited illness. We weren't interested in enhancement like the others. We wanted healing, not manipulation. She sipped her tea. Her hand trembled slightly, but her voice didn't. Then they came. They didn't call themselves anything, just the backers. They wore suits. They came with grants, fellowships, lifetime tenure promises. At first, we didn't ask questions. The funding allowed us to expand the lab, build prototypes, the kind of work you dream of in school. She paused and Ivy caught the flicker in her mother's eyes. But then they started sending their own people, quiet men with defense backgrounds and sanitized credentials. They began to ask for data. We weren't collecting neurological responses to stress, pain, tolerance, chemical durability under duress. We realized they weren't trying to heal people. Her voice turned bitter. They were trying to build them. Ivy's stomach turned. They wanted super resilient children, Mira continued. Modified embryos, gene silencing, neural amplification, all hidden under the umbrella of advanced therapeutic exploration. Elliot pushed back. We both did. He wrote a memo refusing to participate in any trials involving unapproved subjects. He wanted out. She laughed bitterly. He thought ethics would protect us. Ivy said nothing. Her throat had closed up. One night he came home late, blood on his collar. Said he'd been followed. That his access to the lab had been revoked. 2 days later, they said he died in a gas leak at a secondary facility. Her voice caught. She didn't bother to hide the tears now. They slipped down her cheeks, not dramatic, just steady like rain on a windshield that had long since cracked. They never showed me the body, just a death certificate, empty casket. I knew he was gone, but I also knew it wasn't an accident. Ivy whispered, and you were pregnant. Mira nodded slowly. 3 weeks after his death, I started having dizzy spells, blackouts. I knew they were drugging me either through food or through the medical checkups they insisted I attend. But I didn't fight. I thought if I played along, I could protect you. She looked at Ivy, then really looked at her, but I wasn't fast enough. Ivy's breath faltered. What happened? They took me into labor in a private facility. No hospital, no birth certificate. I was restrained during delivery, anesthesia so strong I couldn't see, couldn't speak. I remember hearing you cry once, that's all. Her voice broke completely then for just a second. When I woke up, you were gone. They told me you were placed with a family, that it was for observation purposes. They gave me a single photograph months later of you sitting in a high chair looking dazed. That was supposed to be enough. Ivy felt something sharp twist inside her. Observation, she repeated. Mira gave a dry laugh. That's what they called it. But you weren't just a baby to them, Ivy. You were a live prototype. She walked to the chest again, opened a lower compartment, and pulled out another file one Ivy hadn't seen before. Inside were copies of lab memos, correspondence between research directors, redacted reports, and at the center, a single sheet labeled Subject GC3 Codename Ivy Observation Classification Full Spectrum Monitoring Placement Type Controlled Domestic Environment Purpose Long-Term Genetic Expression Evaluation. Ivy's blood ran cold. They called you Generation C, Mira said, voice tight. A controlled implantation with modified genetic markers. Implantation, Ivy said, her voice cracking. They didn't just watch you, they engineered you. The sentence knocked the breath from her lungs. Ivy stood abruptly, the blanket falling from her shoulders. She felt unsteady, raw. Her skin itched with invisible hands, memories that didn't belong to her, decisions made without her voice, her will. I'm not real, she muttered, pacing. I'm a test, a lab rat in a bigger cage. No, Mira said, voice sharp. You are my daughter. That's real. What they did to your genes doesn't erase your humanity. But they chose me, Ivy snapped. They picked my life, designed my symptoms, controlled me. Mira stood. Yes, and still you survived. Ivy turned to her rage boiling to the surface. They let them raise me. A family that drugged me every day, monitored me, lied to me. Yes. And you just watched. Her voice cracked under the pressure. You let them keep me. I didn't let them, Mira said. I couldn't find you. They erased your trail, changed your ID. Even hospitals couldn't access your records. Every time I got close, they moved you again. Her voice was no longer pleading. It was bare, honest. I've been running and digging and surviving for 17 years, Ivy, and I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for a chance to fight with you now. Ivy backed into the wall, her breath shallow, heart racing. This isn't real, she whispered. This can't be real. But it was. The files, the DNA match, the notebook entries from her childhood that had no medical explanation. The pills, the folder labeled Trial Group C. It had all been real. And she was standing in a wooden cabin in the middle of nowhere facing a woman whose eyes mirrored her own, whose story cut deeper than even the Carters' betrayal. Ivy slid to the floor. Her hands trembled. I don't know who I am, she said. Mira knelt beside her. You're Ivy. You're brilliant. You're stubborn. You're stronger than they ever counted on. And you're mine. The words fell into the silence like a match into gasoline. Not everything ignited at once, but it burned, slowly, from the inside out. For the first time in her life, Ivy felt a warmth that didn't come from the fire, didn't come from blankets or tea. It came from truth, and blood, and rage. The mornings came cold and slow. Not the kind of cold that numbs your bones, but the kind that lingers just beneath the skin, a memory of frost that never fully melts. Ivy felt it each time she stood, each time her muscles ached from disuse, each time her breath caught with frustration at how far she still had to go. But she moved anyway. Each day began with firewood and silence. Mira said little as she stoked the flames, her focus razor sharp like the routine was her way of keeping the chaos from creeping back in. Ivy mimicked that ritual over emotion structure, over collapse. They carved out a rhythm. Stretch, brace, balance. Mira led with the discipline of someone who'd spent years preparing for a storm she hoped would never come. Ivy followed not because she trusted the world again, but because her body for the first time was no longer being dulled by pills. She felt everything now. The tightness in her hamstrings, the tremors in her fingers, the fire in her lungs as she hiked the half-mile trail that looped behind the cabin. But she also felt something else, clarity. Without the fog of medication, her thoughts sharpened. Memory flickered back. Not the kind you find in photo albums, but the kind that hides behind silence the way Meredith used to watch her while she slept. The locked box in Paul's closet labeled Carter sensitive. The questions doctors never answered, and the questions she'd been told never to ask. Now with Mira at her side, Ivy wasn't just surviving. She was preparing. Always keep the knife on your dominant side, Mira instructed one afternoon, handing her a folding blade, and never assume a door is locked just because it looks secure. They practiced in the back shed disarming drills, close-range strikes, escape tactics. Mira taught her how to break line of sight in a forest, how to move quietly in snow, how to read the terrain like a language written in leaves and footprints. You've lived in captivity your whole life, she said once bluntly. Now you learn how to be dangerous. Ivy didn't argue. She wanted to be dangerous. At night, they spread documents across the table, pages salvaged from Mira's journals, printed memos, scribbled notes from a decade ago. They were looking for patterns, names, survivors, loose ends that had escaped the fire of the cover-up. One name kept surfacing, Dr. Nolan Reese, a former postdoctoral researcher under Elliot, one of the youngest in the original neurogenetics unit. Mira remembered him as brilliant but easily manipulated, the kind of mind desperate to belong somewhere, even if that place was monstrous. He had disappeared 5 months before Elliot's death. At the time, the team thought he'd been fired. But Mira remembered something strange. Nolan had called her once after hours speaking in riddles, asking questions about phase transitions and behavioral variables in minors. Then he hung up mid-sentence. Now his name appeared again in a decrypted file Mira recovered from an old flash drive. Phase 3 oversight. Dr. N. Reese, provisional clearance pending. He was involved, Mira said, tapping the page, but not completely in their pocket. Ivy leaned in. So maybe he saw what happened to Dad and ran. Maybe, Mira said, or maybe he knows exactly what they're still doing. The problem was Nolan had disappeared. No university affiliations, no digital footprint, no employment records for the last 12 years. People don't just vanish, Ivy muttered, scrolling through dead links and outdated contact numbers. They do, Mira said, when they know something worth killing for. It was Ivy who found him. Not in a hospital, not in a research lab, but in an online support forum for neurodegenerative disease caregivers. a post written 6 months ago by someone named NR63 describing a highly specific genetic mutation mimicking early-stage Parkinson's in a child who'd never been diagnosed. The language was clinical, precise, too precise for a random parent. Ivy cross-referenced the account's email address with a string of aliases tied to research grant applications Mira had stored years ago. The IP traced to a remote town in northern Colorado, a place called Wetlow. Population under 900. Do you think it's really him? Ivy asked. Mira didn't answer right away. She stared at the screen for a long moment, then nodded. Yes, she said, and I think he's hiding. They packed that night. Not everything, just essentials. Mira buried the hard drives beneath floorboards, locked down the cabin's systems, and left a note with a trusted contact in case they didn't return. The next morning, they drove west. The mountains shifted around them as the sun rose snow-draped cliffs. Frozen lakes, dense pine canopies casting long shadows over winding roads. Ivy watched it all pass with a sense of suspended disbelief. She wasn't just leaving the cabin. She was crossing into war. Wetlow wasn't marked on most maps. Just a series of cabins tucked along the slope of a forgotten ridge where cell service blinked in and out like a heartbeat trying to stop. They found Nolan in the cabin older than Mira's. He didn't answer the door at first. Mira knocked 3 times, then waited silent, her hands in her pockets, not moving. When the door creaked open, the man standing there looked nothing like a scientist. He was gaunt, bearded, his eyes once bright with ambition, now sunken, watchful and twitching like an animal long hunted. Go away, he said, trying to shut the door. Mira blocked it with her boot. Elliot's daughter. He froze. His eyes darted to Ivy. Something in him shifted. He opened the door wider. They stepped into a single-room shelter lined with bookshelves and silence. Old medical charts lined the walls and a dusty microscope sat unused on the table. Ivy scanned the room. Everything about it whispered guilt. Nolan didn't sit. He paced, twitching fingers, avoiding eye contact. You shouldn't be here, he said. They still have watchers. You think you're off the grid, but no one's ever really off. You kept the data, Mira said. He stopped pacing. I know you did, she continued. I know you took it before you left. Nolan looked at Ivy again. His voice dropped. She was the only one who didn't break. The room went still. What, Ivy asked. 27 children, he said, all phase 3, all modified before birth. You were the only one who passed all 3 observation cycles without neurological collapse. Ivy's mouth went dry. They said it was a miracle, he continued. I said it was a mistake. You weren't supposed to live past 14. The side effects were supposed to manifest brainstem degeneration, complete synaptic degradation. But I did live, Ivy said, stepping closer. I'm still here. He swallowed. That's why they're afraid of you. Where's the data, Mira asked. Nolan hesitated. Then he walked to a locked drawer, opened it, and retrieved a flash drive no bigger than a thumb. He handed it to Ivy. It's all there, he said. Trial protocols, genomic maps, directives from the funding board. If you release this, you'll expose everything. Not just the program, but the people funding it. Government officials, private defense contractors, medical ethics panels. This will burn careers. It'll take down names you've never even heard of. Good, Ivy said. Nolan looked at her, and for the first time she saw something in his eyes other than fear. Respect. You're not what they made, he said. You're what they never expected. They left Wetlow before dawn. The flash drive Nolan gave them sat inside a zippered pouch in Mira's backpack, sandwiched between a loaded first aid kit and a hunting knife. Ivy had memorized its weight. Her fingers brushed over it every few minutes like she was checking her own pulse. Where now, Ivy asked as Mira pulled onto the snow-slicked road that cut between the trees like a vein carved into white flesh. South, Mira said. There's one more person we need to see. A whistleblower, a doctor who quit the program after phase 3. I don't know her real name, but I know where she went to disappear. They were 20 miles outside of Wetlow when Ivy noticed the headlights. Behind us, she said quietly. Mira checked the rear-view mirror. Her mouth drew tight. The black SUV trailed them with just enough distance to pretend it was coincidence. But it wasn't. Ivy had seen that kind of driving before, predator pacing prey. How long, she asked. They picked us up in town, probably watching the cabin since before we arrived. License plate. Mira didn't look. There won't be one. Ivy's fingers tightened around the door handle. Do we run? Mira's answer was simple. Yes. She turned off the paved road without hesitation, steering the truck down a narrower path that veered between towering pines, the tires crunching over compact snow. The trees thickened, the road curved. Behind them, the SUV followed. No hesitation, no turn signal, just the mechanical precision of people who had done this before. Ivy's heart hammered. We can't outrun them on roads, she said. We're not going to. Mira swerved again, this time onto a fire access trail barely wide enough for a single vehicle. Branches whipped against the windshield. Ivy ducked instinctively as snow exploded across the glass. They'll have GPS, Ivy said. They'll be tracking the vehicle. Mira nodded. Then we give them the vehicle. She slammed the brakes and cut the engine. Out! Now! They jumped out into thigh-deep snow. Mira popped the hood, yanked out the GPS tracker from beneath the frame, already blinking red, and stuffed it into a metal thermos. She tossed it far into the trees where it landed with a muffled crunch. Then she slashed the tires with her blade. "No ride," she muttered, "no trail." Ivy stared at her. "That's going to piss them off." Mira gave a grim smile. "Let it." They moved into the woods fast and low, Mira leading through snowdrifts and brambles, her steps deliberate but quick. Ivy followed close, each breath sharp in her throat. The cold bit into her lungs, but adrenaline numbed it. They kept off obvious trails, weaving through narrow rock paths, and under thick, low-hanging branches, their footprints swallowed quickly by fresh snowfall. Behind them, engines roared. The SUV skidded into the clearing, lights sweeping across the trees. Doors opened. Voices barked commands. Ivy didn't look back. They kept going, until they didn't. A crack, sharp and sudden, split the air. Gunshot. Ivy felt Mira's body jolt beside her. She caught her before she fell, fully guiding her behind a snowbank. "Where?" shoulder, Mira hissed. "Through and through. Hurts like hell, but it's clean." Blood seeped through her coat, dark against the snow. Ivy didn't think. She ripped off her scarf and wrapped it tight around Mira's shoulder, knotting it with trembling fingers. "Keep pressure, we keep moving," Mira gritted. But Ivy was already pulling her toward the ridge to their left. She remembered this terrain from their drills. The slope narrowed toward a riverbed, frozen solid this time of year, but the banks dropped steep enough to lose a tail. They slid down together, feet barely holding traction, until they reached the river. Ivy tested the ice solid. "We crossed," she said. They ran. Gunfire cracked again, but it was distant now, unfocused. Ivy kept her body between Mira and the line of fire, heart hammering every breath, a countdown to whatever came next. They crossed the river, ducked beneath a fallen log, and vanished into a rocky outcrop Mira had once called a natural blind spot. Then silence. Just wind, and their ragged breathing. Ivy crouched beside her mother, unzipped the pack, and pulled out gauze, alcohol, and a needle. Mira bit down on a stick as Ivy worked hands steady despite the blur of panic clawing at her spine. "You're doing good," Mira whispered through clenched teeth. "You're damn heavy for a wounded woman," Ivy muttered, tying the gauze tight. That earned a breath of a laugh. They rested for 20 minutes, long enough to catch their breath, not long enough to freeze. Then they moved again. By late afternoon, they reached a ranger cabin abandoned for winter. Ivy picked the lock with a hairpin. They slipped inside, bolted the door, and collapsed beside the old wood stove Mira lit from memory. Ivy peeled off her gloves. Her hands shook, not from cold, from fury. "They followed us for days," she said. "They waited." Mira sat propped against the wall, her breathing shallow but stable. "They always wait. They don't care if it takes years." "Why not just kill me?" Ivy snapped. "Why go to all this trouble?" Mira met her gaze. "Because you're proof. You're not supposed to exist. You're a living contradiction." Ivy stood pacing. "I want names," she said. "Not just shadows, not just stories. I want to know who." "We will," Mira said, "but first we need to reach her." "Who is she?" "Her name's Dr. Rena Voss. She was one of the internal ethics consultants during Phase 3. She walked out mid-project, no notice, no records. She disappeared into Canada, then reappeared last year under a different name, teaching biology at a community college under fake credentials." Ivy nodded slowly. "She's the only one who ever said no and lived." Mira leaned forward. "She'll talk, especially when she sees you." They slept in shifts that night. Ivy lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying the chase, the blood, the ice, the silence. She had thought survival was about waking up. Now she knew survival was action. The next day, they made it to the meeting point, a service station 30 miles south of the border. They arrived early, and she was already there. Dr. Rena Voss looked nothing like Ivy expected. Not a lab coat, not fear. Just a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and eyes that saw everything. She looked at Ivy, and her face changed. "Oh my God," she whispered. "They told us you all died." Ivy stepped closer. "They lied." Dr. Voss reached into her bag, pulled out a leather notebook. "I have files. I kept everything I could. They said it was treason. I didn't care. I thought they'd kill me eventually." She looked at Ivy again, softer now. "There were 5 of you, 5 final subjects. You were the only one whose records disappeared entirely. The others..." She paused. 2 died before age 10, 1 was institutionalized, 1 vanished. That left you. "I want to know what they did to me," Ivy said. Dr. Voss nodded. "I'll show you everything, but you have to understand. If you speak, if you go public, they won't stop. They'll erase you." Ivy didn't blink. They already tried. She reached into her coat pocket and handed the doctor the flash drive Nolan had given her. Dr. Voss stared at it, and Ivy saw her shoulders straighten, her spine rise like a woman who just remembered who she used to be. "Then let's finish what they started." The glow of the laptop screen was the only light in the motel room. Outside, the neon sign buzzed faintly in the freezing dusk. Inside, Ivy sat hunched over the keyboard, her fingers trembling not from the cold, but from the sheer weight of what she was looking at. The flash drive was decrypted. And it was worse than anything she had imagined. Her file alone spanned over 900 megabytes. Clinical data, EEG scans, hormone tracking charts, sleep patterns, neurological thresholds. Even her night terrors had been logged. There were video files too, her at 6 strapped to a gurney, her at 9 under sedation, her at 12 screaming behind a two-way mirror. Each file was marked with a timestamp coded under subject GC3. No name, no identity, just a sequence. She hit play on one of the older files. The screen flickered, revealing grainy footage from a hospital room. Ivy, no more than 5, sat playing with a red rubber ball, while a man in a white coat whispered into a handheld recorder. Subject GC3 demonstrates exceptional synaptic elasticity, minimal resistance to imposed memory implants, tolerance to immunosuppressants above predicted threshold. Next begin test batch Y17. Ivy slammed the laptop shut. I'm done watching, she said. Mira sat on the edge of the bed, arms folded. Her wound was healing slower than she liked, but her mind was razor sharp. This is enough, Ivy said. We go public. Mira met her gaze. They will come for you. Let them, Ivy snapped. But they'll have to do it in front of cameras, in front of a courtroom. Silence stretched. Then Mira nodded once. Then we do this on our terms. They checked out that night. Ivy cut her hair short. Mira dyed hers black. They ditched the truck 2 counties away, then rented a car under a fake name, driving under the radar, every hour bringing them closer to the city they once called home. Ivy hadn't seen the skyline in months. It rose out of the morning haze like a threat, jagged and unforgiving. Skyscrapers that once felt like promises now looked like surveillance towers. But she didn't flinch. She had work to do. They checked into a business suite under the name of a nonprofit Mira had once co-founded during her university years long dormant, but still legally alive. Ivy reached out to a contact she'd found online, a civil liberties lawyer named Travis Bell, who specialized in whistleblower protection and genetic rights litigation. He agreed to meet. The moment Travis saw the contents of the drive, his face went pale. This isn't just unethical, it's genocidal. Ivy didn't blink. Good, then make it visible. They spent 2 days building the foundation. Travis brought in a forensic data team to verify the drive's contents and authenticate the signatures on the Phase 3 documentation. Meanwhile, Ivy worked with a small group of investigative journalists, sending them specific folders, redacted names, strategic leaks. Mira handled the timing. Don't give them time to bury it, she said. We launch all at once. When Ivy hit upload, her hands were steady. She posted a short video from a burner account. No face, just her voice. My name is Ivy Carter. I was born in a lab, raised by handlers, medicated, monitored, manipulated. I was one of 5 human subjects genetically modified as part of a program funded by private contractors and buried beneath fake pediatric care initiatives. I have the proof, and you deserve to see it. The video cut to footage from the flash drive, blurry, horrific, undeniable. Then came the documents, the logs, the names. One name in particular surged to the surface. Meredith Carter, publicly known as a community health director for over a decade. Behind closed doors, a logistics coordinator for the Phase 3 trial. Paul Carter, her husband, was listed as a financial liaison. They had siphoned over $2.3 million in health research funds, falsified hospital records, and filed 23 separate reports listing Ivy as a voluntarily adopted special needs dependent. The internet exploded. Within hours, Ivy's post had been shared over 1 million times. GC3 trended globally. By sunset, mainstream media outlets had picked it up. The footage was too detailed to be fake. The documentation was airtight. Whistleblowers emerged, former janitors, technicians, even one secretary who admitted she'd been told to shred odd medical records involving children. And then came the warrant. Meredith and Paul Carter were arrested at their home at 3:42 p.m. The footage showed them being escorted in cuffs, Meredith screaming about fabricated lies, Paul trying to cover his face from the cameras. But the damage was irreversible. Their neighbors watched. Their community watched. The country watched. And Ivy watched it all unfold from the window of her suite, silent. They never expected you to speak, Mira said. They never thought I could, Ivy replied. Travis stepped in with the press conference the next morning. Ivy stayed off camera, but her story was center stage. This is not science. This is eugenics wrapped in grant money and hidden under paperwork, Travis declared. And we will be naming every official, every funder, every lab that enabled this. Lawsuits followed. Investigations were launched across 4 agencies. Medical licensing boards scrambled to revoke credentials. Hospitals released public apologies. Politicians denied knowledge, but the truth had a momentum now, one no institution could stop. Ivy sat with Mira that night on the rooftop of the building. Below, sirens blared and city lights flickered like static. You okay, Mira asked. Ivy shook her head. No, but I'm not scared anymore. They watched in silence. Then Ivy pulled out her phone, opened her email, and began typing. Not to lawyers, not to journalists, to survivors. She knew there had to be more patients, misdiagnosed families that never got answers, children lost in foster systems who remembered pills that made their bodies ache and their minds fog. She wrote, "If you've seen the video and you recognize what happened to me, know this, you're not alone. We're building something now, something that protects us. Reach out. Your truth matters too." Within minutes, the replies began to arrive. The knock came just past midnight. 3 short raps, polite, measured, the kind of knock that didn't ask permission, it assumed it. Ivy froze. Mira was asleep on the couch, her shoulder still bandaged, her breathing finally even. Ivy padded silently across the suite and peered through the peephole. A man in a tailored charcoal coat stood alone in the hallway. But something about the way he held his posture made her stomach drop. She didn't open the door. He spoke, his voice low but crisp, cutting through the silence like a scalpel. "Miss Carter, we'd like a word, just a brief conversation. No need for alarm." Ivy didn't reply. He waited, then said, "You have something that belongs to very powerful people. I'm only here to give you a choice." That was enough. Ivy backed away from the door, grabbed her phone, and dialed Travis. "They're here." Less than a minute later, a second knock. This one louder, more urgent, then silence. By the time the hotel's private security arrived, the man was gone. They'd left behind nothing, no camera footage, no ID, just a folded business card slipped beneath the door. On it, a message typed in all caps. "We do not forgive. You have 72 hours to comply." No signature, just coordinates. Ivy dropped the card into the sink and lit a match. The next morning, Mira was gone. No signs of forced entry. Just an open window and a single line scratched into the bathroom mirror with a razor. "She will not die unless you make her." The message hit like a punch to the chest. Travis rushed to the hotel. Ivy was already in motion. Her eyes burned not from tears but from rage so clear it tasted metallic on her tongue. "They want the drive," she said. "They think taking her will make me fold." "They could have taken you," Travis said. "I'm the bargaining chip," she snapped. "I'm the stage. They want a performance. They want obedience, public humiliating." Travis hesitated. "Then we don't give it to them. We build a trap." "Where they gave you coordinates. That's their arrogance. They think we'll come alone." Ivy leaned forward. "Then let's show them how wrong they are." The plan was delicate, dangerous, and legally threading a needle. Travis called in a contact at the DOJ, someone from the Office of Special Medical Ethics who owed him a favor and had wanted a crack at this case for years. Together, they secured a covert task force equipped for sting operations. The press was harder. No network wanted to touch it publicly, too risky, too many legal landmines. But a handful of freelance journalists, the kind who thrived on the edge of the story, agreed to embed. The meeting would be live-streamed through hidden cameras uploaded in real time to decentralized servers. The trap was set. Ivy would go in, alone, but not unarmed. She carried 2 things, a flash drive rigged with a traceable digital signature and a lapel mic linked to every device in the surveillance van 2 miles away. Travis adjusted the mic himself. "If anything goes wrong, say the word Spectre. That's the kill switch." "Understood." She nodded. The location was a luxury estate buried deep in a woodland preserve, privately owned, gated with no direct neighbors for miles. Ivy arrived just before sunset. The gate creaked open on its own. No one greeted her. Inside, the air was dry and sterile, the kind of cold that came from wealth built on secrets. Ivy walked past a foyer lined with framed art that looked deliberately generic, nothing memorable, everything expensive. She was led to a private lounge by a man in a gray suit with dead eyes. Inside, 5 people. 4 men, 1 woman. No names, just seats arranged like a courtroom that didn't need a judge. The woman, poised severe with a smile that never reached her eyes, spoke first. "Miss Carter, you've caused quite the disruption." Ivy stood, shoulders squared. Truth usually does. "Let's not pretend you've won," the woman said. "All you've done is scratch the surface." Ivy's fingers brushed the flash drive in her coat pocket. "I'm here for my mother," she said. The man to the right smiled faintly. "Safe, for now. Her fate depends on your decision." "You want the files?" Ivy asked. "Fine, I'll give them to you." She pulled out the drive and set it on the table. "But you'll release her first." "Of course," the woman said. "We're not monsters." Ivy's gaze flicked toward the door behind them. Nothing. No movement. "Where is she?" The man in gray tilted his head. "She'll be here shortly, assuming you're cooperative." "And if I'm not?" The smile vanished. The woman leaned forward. "We erase you, and then we go after every person you care about, quietly, permanently." Silence. Then Ivy said, "That's a shame." She pressed the button on her wristwatch. At first, nothing. Then all at once, sirens, shouts, heavy footsteps pounding down hallways. The woman's face fell. "What the?" Hidden cameras blinked to life. The flash drive beeped and triggered a broadcast loop. In real time, every screen in the room lit up with journalists in vans, DOJ agents, shouting through megaphones, legal authorities yelling, "This is a federal intervention, do not move." The front door burst open. Chaos erupted. 2 agents tackled the man in gray as he reached for a concealed pistol. The woman tried to run. A second agent cut her off, slamming her to the ground. Ivy didn't move. She walked calmly to the side door where Mira stumbled in, flanked by two officers. Her face was bruised, her arm bound, but her eyes burned with defiance. "Still alive," she whispered. Ivy caught her as she sagged. The trap had worked. The meeting had been broadcast in full: threats, confessions, identities. No spin, no denials. The organization faceless for so long was now visible. They had names, and they had consequences. That night, Ivy stood in front of a courtroom building surrounded by cameras. She didn't flinch. "The truth isn't enough," she said. "We need accountability. We need protection. We need laws that make sure what happened to me doesn't happen again. I'm not afraid of them anymore, and neither should you be." She didn't cry. She didn't break. She stood. And the world finally listened. The press conference took place under a gray sky. Rain tapped lightly on the canopy above the podium, but Ivy stood firm beneath it. No umbrella, no teleprompter. Just her, a mic, and the weight of a world beginning to awaken. Behind her, the courthouse loomed no longer a symbol of fear, but of reckoning. To her left stood Mira, a protective hand resting on her daughter's back. To her right, Travis Bell shuffled a stack of legal documents with the calm resolve of someone who'd just set fire to a dynasty and lived to tell about it. This morning, Ivy began the Department of Justice in coordination with independent investigators and whistleblower accounts officially launched a federal inquiry into unethical genetic research conducted over the last 20 years. She didn't blink as the flashes popped. "You've seen the footage. You've read the files. I am not a theory. I am not a conspiracy. I am the product of people who use science as a weapon and children as lab rats." Gasps rippled through the crowd. "But I'm still standing." The files from the sting operation were published on an open-access digital archive. Every contract, every transcript, every medical record scrubbed of identities where necessary but intact. Irrefutable. Unforgivable. The public backlash was immediate. Outrage turned viral. Dark science trended globally within hours. Journalists picked apart the funding chains, revealing how black-budget research had filtered through university grants and charity organizations. Lawmakers who had once dismissed Ivy's claims now scrambled to demand hearings. A bipartisan task force was formed to investigate all bioethics violations between 2003 and 2022. But justice didn't end there. 3 days after the sting, Ivy sat quietly inside courtroom 17B, watching Meredith and Paul Carter being led in wearing orange jumpsuits, wrists shackled. They looked smaller than she remembered. Weaker. Paul kept his head down. Meredith, always proud, always precise, tried to meet Ivy's gaze. Ivy didn't flinch. The charges read aloud were damning: multiple counts of child endangerment, participation in illegal medical experimentation, fraudulent misappropriation of public health funds, tampering with federal records, conspiracy to conceal human rights violations. But the worst of it, the one that made even the judge's voice falter, was the final charge: intentional psychological and physiological manipulation of a minor for clandestine biomedical research. The courtroom held its breath. Meredith pled not guilty. Paul caved, guilty on all counts. His testimony broke what little credibility she had left. "I didn't know it would go that far," he mumbled through tears. "We were promised funding. They said she'd be protected, watched, not tortured." Ivy left before sentencing. She didn't need to hear the numbers. She already knew no prison term would match what she'd survived. Mira and Ivy moved into federal protective housing for the first month after the takedown. Armed security details followed them everywhere, not out of paranoia but necessity. The remnants of the organization still lurked in corners, fragmenting, hiding, waiting for their moment. But Ivy didn't hide anymore. She spent the days speaking to reporters, testifying before panels, attending hearings where scientists squirmed under cross-examination and funders fumbled for excuses. One evening, returning from a televised interview, Ivy found Mira sitting alone on the balcony of their temporary home, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the skyline. "You okay?" Ivy asked. Mira smiled, soft and tired. "You remember when you were little and I told you the stars were holes poked into the sky by people who wanted to watch over us?" Ivy nodded, sitting beside her. "I always hoped," Mira whispered, "that you'd be under those stars. That somehow, even if I couldn't find you, you'd look up and feel loved." Ivy leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. "I never stopped wondering if I was real," she said. "Like if I was mine, not theirs." "You're more than real," Mira said. "You're free." They sat in silence, wind brushing through the open window, the city below unaware of the quiet history rewriting itself above. 3 weeks later, Ivy was formally declared a legal victim of federal crimes against minors. She was issued a new birth certificate. Mira's name was restored as her legal guardian. Old files were sealed. New identities were offered. But Ivy declined. "I want to be visible," she told the agents. "They don't get to erase me again." Instead, she filed paperwork to establish a foundation. The Carter Initiative for Biomedical Justice, a nonprofit dedicated to protecting children from unethical science, offering legal aid, psychological support, and investigative grants to journalists and survivors alike. The first press release read, "We were silent for too long, now we amplify every voice they tried to bury." Funding poured in. Survivors wrote letters, nurses came forward. Even an ex-security guard confessed that he'd once stood watch outside a locked room where the crying never stopped. The nation held its breath as Ivy addressed Congress in a closed-door session. "I'm not the end of this story," she told them. "I'm the beginning of yours. What happens next is your legacy." And still amidst all the chaos, Ivy found herself healing. Slowly. Deliberately. She learned how to breathe without bracing, how to trust the sound of footsteps behind her, how to laugh again. Mira took up teaching under her real name, finally lecturing in public about bioethics with the freedom she'd been denied for 2 decades. They bought a small house just outside the city. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't sterile, but it was home. One afternoon, Ivy found an old photo buried inside a manila envelope Mira had kept hidden all these years. It showed a newborn wrapped in a blue blanket, her face red and scrunched, one tiny fist curled in the air, like she already knew the fight that waited. On the back, Mira had written in pencil, "I named her Ivy because she'd grow through concrete." Ivy stared at it for a long time. Then with steady hands, she framed it and hung it on her wall next to her legal ID, next to the congressional medal she'd reluctantly accepted, next to a framed newspaper article titled, "From Lab Rat to Lighthouse, How Ivy Carter Exposed a Nation's Darkest Science." Justice had come. It hadn't been handed to her. She had ripped it, clawed it, dragged it into the light. And now finally it belonged to her. Genlight wasn't born in a boardroom. It began in a borrowed church basement with flickering lights, folding chairs, and the sound of trembling voices daring sometimes for the first time to speak. There were no press releases, no investors, no suits and ties. Just Ivy, a whiteboard, and a room full of people who had spent their lives being told to forget what was done to them. But Ivy didn't forget. She refused to. Genlight was her refusal, carved into policy, stitched into safe houses, wired into legal pipelines and trauma care networks. A foundation built on wreckage but growing like green from concrete. By the end of the first quarter, Genlight had processed 417 inquiries, uncovered 3 previously unknown research operations, and reunited 4 children with surviving family members. Each file had a name. Each name had a pain. And Ivy carried all of them. Mira came on as chief advisor for scientific ethics. She wore reading glasses now, the kind that made her look more like a professor than a survivor. But her voice never lost its edge. She rewrote policy drafts with fire and precision, making sure no loophole could ever again be used to hide medical torture behind academic language. "I won't let them weaponize intelligence," she told Ivy one night. "Not while I still breathe." They worked side by side, never needing to say out loud what both understood: this was their second life, and it had to mean something. Word of Ivy's mission spread. Podcasts, documentaries, survivor panels. People whispered the name Genlight like a password, like hope. A 12-year-old boy in Oregon sent a letter handwritten in marker saying Ivy's story helped him realize the pills his foster mother gave him weren't vitamins. A woman in Brazil emailed saying she'd been part of a medical trial at 8 and thought she was crazy until she saw Ivy's interview. A man from Ireland flew to the US just to say thank you in person. Some days it overwhelmed her. Other days it saved her. And slowly, without permission, Ivy began to heal. She no longer slept with the light on. Her breath no longer caught when someone called her name in a crowd. She stopped counting exits every time she entered a room. She laughed. She argued. She lived. And on one quiet afternoon in December, she did something she hadn't done since she was a child. She wrote. Snow drifted lazily outside the cabin window. Thick, soft flakes layered the pines in silence, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Ivy sat cross-legged on a wooden bench beside the frosted glass, a wool blanket around her shoulders, a steaming mug beside her, and her journal open across her lap. The ink bled a little where her hand had rested too long, but she didn't care. She wrote slowly, deliberately, each word a release. December 17th. I came back here today, to the mountain where I was supposed to disappear. Funny how the snow looks softer now, less like a threat, more like a witness. I used to believe being alive was just surviving, getting through the day, holding my breath until the night passed. But maybe it's more than that. Maybe being alive means refusing to forget, choosing to see, choosing to stay. She paused. Outside, the wind danced gently through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, an eagle cried out. She thought of the people she'd met, the lives she'd helped redirect, the children she would never meet but whose names she'd already protected. And then she thought of Mira. Downstairs, Mira was making soup, humming to herself. Not a lullaby, not a hymn. Just life. Normal, unremarkable, beautiful. Ivy smiled and continued. They thought the snow would bury me, that I'd freeze and vanish, a footnote in someone else's file. But they didn't understand one thing. I wasn't born to be erased. She capped the pen and leaned her forehead gently against the cold glass. Outside, the snow kept falling, but inside everything was warm and alive.